Welcome back, Rock Hoppers. Stately here. I'm the game's lead developer, and today I'm here to talk to you about modular prefabs. As always, if you haven't watched the previous videos, you should probably check those out first. But assuming you have, today we're going to learn how to use coupler blocks to chain together prefabs. We're going to learn how to use substructure tags to manage the size and the shape of the modular prefabs, and we'll talk about clustering. And finally, we'll look at the prefab settings in the prefab menu, and we'll talk about how they're different from regular prefabs. Before we do any of that, I want to show you what I'm talking about here. So this is an example of a modular prefab. And this is one of the simpler designs we use in Rock Hoppers. What we have here is an airlock and two wings. You can just about make this one out under the ground here. And there's one over here as well. So let's go ahead and have a look inside. And as you can see, here's our airlock. I'm in no clip mode, so I'm flying through things and the mobs aren't spawning. That's just the way of this. And either of these sides has one of several different possible wings. And with just this one airlock and, 6 or 7 different wings to choose from, you can create 40, 50 variants. So your players will never really run into the exact same thing twice. All right, let's take a moment to look at what this looks like in the editor. And here is that same airlock in the editor. As you can see, the wings are nowhere to be seen, but we do have must-be solid blocks on either side, so we can make sure that when we place this, it'll be in a reasonable location to have these wings attached to them. And down here, we have our coupler block. This is the secret sauce. The coupler block tells you where to attach a substructure and how to attach it. We'll go into more detail in this in a second, but I want to show you how this works before we get started. This is the substructure ID that we're looking for. We're going to pull up a more elaborate example now. We're going to show you the abandoned AIM mine. Okay, and this then is the more elaborate example. This is our abandoned mine, and this works exactly the same way. We have individual segments that are all stuck together using basically a chain of individual substructures. And you can make really elaborate, really varied environments with this. This one here, for example, goes on forever and ever and ever. And again, it's a pretty straightforward looking thing in the prefab. I'll pull that up real quick and we'll have a look. And here it is. This is our mine entrance. Not much to it. Just the same thing we've seen before. We have our mission start here. We have our entrance here. We've used virtual walls to seal this off, like I explained in the previous episode about meta blocks. And here's our coupler block again. In this case, attaches to something called new mine wide. Pretty straightforward. Okay, that's enough theoretical explanation. Let's get to work. Let's go ahead and pull up our little prefab that we've been working on all this time, and we're going to add a couple of modular rooms to it. So here we are. Zero, zero, zero test. And it looks just like we left it. So what we're going to do is I think we're going to add a room here. We'll go ahead and break this and we'll put a door in. It doesn't have to be a door. The individual areas do not have to be separated. So it could just be a hallway, but we're going to use a door today. And there we go. All right. Now, this is the secret sauce right here. This is where the proverbial magic happens. We're going to go ahead and place a coupler block. And the coupler block is what tells the world generator that we want to attach something here. We're going to place it like this. And what happens here is that This will match up to the root block on our substructure. We'll keep this simple. I am going to go ahead and give this a substructure ID. So this is the ID tag of the valid substructure that can connect to this. This is not unique. Multiple substructures can have the same tag. So you can have a corridor that goes straight, a corridor that branches off to the right, one that branches off to the left, and a big old room. As long as they all have the same tag, we will be able to attach them together here. We're going to call our substructure 000 substruct. Easy to remember. It's relevant because it matches the name of our prefab here, which is called 000 test. You can also have multiple substructure tabs on a single coupler. So for example, I could say that this can connect to a hallway, a room, or a dead end. And this allows me to be a little more granular with the way I put my prefabs together. I can say that my rooms can connect to a hallway or a dead end, but not another room. And I can say my hallways can connect to a room or a dead end, but not another hallway. And that's it. So now we're going to save this, and we are going to build something to attach to this. Let's go ahead and create that. Select the prefabs menu, and we'll create a new prefab. Substructures are just prefabs. We will call this 000 test sub. And here we are. Here's our root block. And since we're here, I will illustrate how this is supposed to connect. You'll never see it like this in the real world because these are on two different prefabs. But the vertical lines here line up, and the arrow on the coupler block points to the dot on the root block. And that is how the build will try to put these things together. So we have put this underneath the middle of a door. I'm going to go ahead and turn the godlight on with L. We have a 3x3 door. This line here connects to the coupler, which is theoretically over here. The door has already been doored. We put the door in the main build, so we're not going to be putting a door down here. We're just going to make a simple little room. And then we'll put something up here like that. And we'll go ahead and put down a little more floor. I'll fast forward through this. And there it is, our simple little room. Although realistically, it's more of a closet. Here it is, our simple little closet. So let's just put a light in here so that, players can see. That's always nice. And maybe we'll put down a sign of some kind. Here, we'll use one of the neon signs. Those are always fun. It's an LED sign. And oh, here's our neon sign. Excellent. And we hit R and we type closet. In case you were wondering, this is a closet. Okay, and now we need to just add a virtual wall here so that we have a sealed room. As previously stated, we have to seal our rooms, and if we don't have a naturally sealed room, we use a virtual wall for that. That way, this area will be free of asteroid material when it spawns in the world. Okay, and now it's time to do our prefab settings. So we'll pull up the setting menu here. This has a name. we're going to go ahead and click the Substruct button here. We don't use the friendly name for substructures except in very specific circumstances, and I will talk about those towards the end of the episode. We still use the instances. We still use the commonality. It works the same way as it does with regular prefabs, except the instance count is calculated for the prefab and not for the entire world. And the commonality also always has to be above 0, generally between 1 and 10. Here's the important part. Substructure. We need to name this, and we will call it 000 test sub, which is the same name we gave the coupler block in our main prefab. We're not going to create a new location here. I'll cover that later. And we will use this in WorldGen. So we'll hit apply. We will go ahead and save this. And then we'll go ahead and generate a quick test world so we can see how it looks. I'll fast forward through that and I'll rejoin you in a minute. Okay, and here we are again back at our little prefab. And if you look over there, you can see that there's a room there. I have turned mob spawning off for the purpose of illustrating our point here, but we're just going to go inside and walk through the airlock. And get blown away a little bit. And here's our room. And look, it says closet. You notice I just got blown into the room. That's because there's no oxygen in here. I didn't put an oxygen pump in here, and because it's a separate room, there's nothing to fill it up. Now it's equalized, so it's fine. This isn't really very interesting, obviously, because there's exactly one room I can attach to this door, and it's always going to be the same. That's obviously not the strong point of the modular system. The idea is that you have multiple substructures with the same substructure tag so that you get some variety. Okay, and here we are again in our little closet substructure. See, it says closet right there, so it must be true. Let's go ahead and pull up the prefab settings and we'll talk about them in just a little more detail. As you can see, we have the substruct toggle on here. That means that this will not render in the world except as a substructure of something else. This is our substruct tag. Now, our substruct tag, again, is not unique. Multiple substructures can have the same tag. Instances and commonality are how we determine which substructure to use. Instances work the exact same way as they do for a regular prefab, only the counts apply just to this one prefab. So I can say I can have 1 to 2 closets on this build, but every instance of that little building will have 1 to 2 closets. Commonality works the same as well. The only thing that we haven't talked about here is the create new location checkbox. Now, normally, the prefab and any substructures attached to the prefab constitute a single location. That means it has a single name. That means it has a single owner. There are situations where you might want to have a building that has multiple locations. An example would be if you were to go into a base and the inhabitant of the base would ask you to go downstairs and kill the Sproaches in the basement. The basement, even though it's part of the same building, would have to be a separate location so that we can add a quest marker to it and have the player actually go there. Another example would be if you have, say, a space station owned by AIM, the Alliance of Independent Miners, but inside of that space station there's a trading post, and the trading post could be owned by the Trading Guild, which has different access rules. For example, AIM might let you walk around their base at all hours, but the Trading Guild might not let you into their trading post unless they're open. So you would create a separate location in that case, and if you were to create a separate location, you need to use the friendly name. It's a new location. When you enter it, it displays the friendly name. It's not a new location. The friendly name is not used. So you're going from one room to the next. Nothing happens. Okay, so that's the basics of how this works, but we need to spend some time talking about how to manage these modular prefabs. It's nice to be able to string all of this stuff together, but there are some risks and challenges involved. The biggest risk is accidentally creating an infinite prefab. This could happen if you were, for example, to make a hallway and have the hallway connect to itself. And if you had nothing else, world generation would try to create an infinite row of hallways. So let's take this example here. This is part of the abandoned mine that I showed you at the beginning of the video, and this is a straight hallway. Let's look at the prefab settings. We can see that the internal name here, the internal substructure tag is called new mine wide, has between 0 and 4 instances with a commonality of 2. And if we look at the coupler, we'll see that the substructure coupler connects to new mine wide. So what that means is that in theory, at least, we could end up with an infinite line of this exact same hallway connecting to itself over and over again. The best way to deal with that is what you've already seen. Create a hard cap on all of your substructures. In this case, this substructure cannot occur more than 4 times. That means that at some point it will either put something else in or it'll run out of things to put in, but either way it won't go on forever. The same risk exists when you start splitting things. If you have a T-junction, you go from 1 mine wide substructure to 2, and it splits again, and it splits again, and it splits again. And again, you end up with an infinite number of substructures that the world generator tries to place, and that's bad. So the same thing counts for things like junctions and rooms with multiple exits. There should always be a maximum number of those. Now the opposite problem can happen too. You can create a mine entrance, and you can have at some point a dead end. The mine's done and you have a cap there. You want that anyway because nothing goes on forever. What if world generation goes, oh, here's a mine entrance. Oh, and here is a random thing that I can place here. I will put down this cap here. You put down the cap and you've got this whole elaborate mine entrance that just runs straight into a dead end. And that's boring. Solution for that is reasonably simple too. You just need to set a minimum number of all of the things that you want to see in the mine or in your substructure, in your prefab. So in this case, we don't have a minimum number of instances of this, but we do have a maximum, because if we don't have a single hallway, it's not a big deal. But in a lot of cases, like here, you'll have a piece of modular structure that you want to appear in every instance of this prefab. So in this case, you would set the minimum instances to something higher than 0. Now, the last thing that you need to consider is that you should always have at least one substructure, one dead-end substructure, so the end of a hallway or something similar, that has no requirements. That is to say, it should have no must-be solid blocks or no make solid blocks. And the reason for that is that it is theoretically possible that you just run out of mine, right? You're building a mine, you run out of asteroid. There are no more valid locations because nothing's solid anymore. And if you don't have a simple dead-end cap that you can put on there, it won't be able to place anything. Now, that's not as big of an issue as accidentally creating an infinite prefab, because it'll simply fail. It won't manage to finish off the prefab, and you'll get an error message in world generation, but it'll finish. The prefab will simply be aborted, but the world will continue to be built. So you're always going to want something like an end cap for any of your modular builds that could otherwise end up in a situation where they can't be finished. And an example of that, a really, really simple example of that is this. This is just some fences, and it kind of indicates that it's ended here. But there's nothing else to it. And on the outside, this has a little sign showing, "Don't come in here. This is the exit." Okay, so that's the basics of creating these modular prefabs. The other thing that I'd like to talk about today is the cluster option. You might have seen this on your prefabs menu while you've been playing around. The cluster option allows you to put substructures nearby your prefab without necessarily being attached to the prefab. And I will load up this bark cone here because it's a very simple example of how that works. This location itself doesn't actually do anything. It's empty, but it has between 3 and 5 bark cone children within a radius of 8 blocks. And what this does is it creates a little forest of bark cones. We can have up to 5 clusters. Up to 5 cluster items. We could theoretically add an outhouse. And these are the same substructure tags as I've been talking about all this time. And say we want one outhouse and it has to be within 12 meters in case you really have to go at night. So this is what that would look like. Obviously, we don't need an outhouse to keep our bark cone company, but that's how that works. Okay, so that's pretty much it for today. We've talked about how to use the substructure couplers, and we've talked about how to use the substructure tags. I've shown you a few examples. Feel free to load these prefabs in from the game, by the way, and you can expand on them yourself. We've also learned some best practices for creating interesting modular prefabs that don't actually break the game. That's important. And that's it. Next episode, we're going to talk about missions. We'll talk about how to place mission item prefabs for fetch quests. We'll have destroy targets and the mission markers themselves. So until next time, thanks again for tuning in.